¿Me indicas, Carlos, si se ve, por
Estamos
favor?
viendo tu pantalla en
We
modo.
can see your screen clearly.
Ya, genial. Buen día.
Okay, so good morning.
Alejandro Medina por acá.
This is
Vamos
Alejandro
a hacer el
Medina,
track
and we're going to
del
see
DVC.
the
Vamos a
DVC.
mostrar la guía de implementación
I
que
will show
se
you
está
the
desarrollando en este momento.
ICVP implementation guide, which is currently in the draft version.
Del
And
proyecto Connectathon
with these Connectathon projects, the idea is to try and identify some elements and then to give more maturity to the guideline. We're going to be looking at the
del
logic
DVC
structures,
IPS, como se le conoce.
DVC IPS, which is what you have to create,
Bueno, la forma de generar este
and then
proyecto
the
es
way of
básicamente
creating
con
the
la
DVC, what it's all about, so that you
los
can clearly
requisitos
understand the
para
context
desarrollar a cada uno de
and
estos
the resources.
de
We're
estos
going to be looking at some of the resources that you must meet. It's
ejemplificar
very
de alguna
similar
forma
to what you're doing, what you did in track one,
resolver un
so
problema
we shouldn't
adicional.
be facing any particular
Y
problems.
posteriormente
And then
miraremos los JSON
we're also
para
going to be looking at some
probar
JSONs,
de
test
lo que
JSONs
específico
for
de
the
la
final
implementación.
interpretation that we can use
Y
for
esta
this
implementación
implementation guide. The
estamos
implementation
en
guide,
fase
you can see that
reciente,
it's
tenemos
still draft
algunos
version,
elementos
but it has several
parte del
elements.
INCON
We're going to have the link there. Once you have the presentation, it's going to be available for you. And in fact, I will
la presentación
paste it in the chat pod. Now,
como QR, supongo. Bueno, la idea de esta
the
guía
idea
es
then behind this
básicamente
guide
desarrollar
is that this is a record
temas
of
de vacuna, ¿ya?
vaccinations.
Es una estructura
It's
para
a
representar vacunas
structure in order
inicialmente.
to represent vaccinations. Originally,
Basado en eso.
it is for yellow. It was for yellow fever, but it's very similar, and it will be transformed into
Una estructura que pueda dar
a
soporte
structure
a
that can also provide support
similitudes
to other
entre
vaccinations.
temas
Although we do
específicos.
have the support for polio and the yellow fever, it's a
Más
structure which is a little more, which is a little longer, and which now supports other types of code. In this case, ICS 11.
Esperamos
So
que se puedan
we're
transmitir
going to be looking at the structure, and I hope that you'll be able to follow me so that we can develop this track. You should be creating the information. You should be taking the vaccination information from your systems, translate it into this new bundle. This is a DVC IPS, that is to say, it has the structure of an IPS, and creating a certificate and to end up with the validation, which is something that we're going to see towards the second part of this presentation, which will be presented by Sergio. So the logical structure, it's the DVC, Digital Vaccination Certificate. You're going to see this in the guide and you can understand what it's all about. And then the other one is the International Certificate of Vaccination and Prophylaxis, ICVP, is the representation of the yellow fever certificate with its elements, which can also be part of the DVC as part of the structure. In the implementation guide, we're going to be looking at the logical structure. We will show you all of these elements. And these DVC and these H cert, all of this is going to, well, it's what's going to be used as part of the applications that we're giving you to create this payload, which will allow you to create this digitally signed QR code with the same keys that you are already using in some cases. And the idea there is to have this certificate and for it to be validated cross borders. So we have the DVC IPS structure, the IPS that must be built using one or more structure according to the DVC that we're going to be using here. The idea is that with the immunization records that you have in your application in development, you can extract the data and then translate this DVC IPS and then to store it in the Fire server. Here in the same one that it's the same thing that we used in track one. That's the easiest way of explaining it. Now, the sequence of the elements Generally, this will have first a consultation with the information of the patient. It can take us to a translation and codification in IC11. Regardless of the format that you have, you can use your terminology server. You can make the transformation, and once you have all of these elements, then you can go and you build the DVC IPS. We're going to give you an example made available in the repository, and we should be giving you there an example of the DVC IPS so that you can use it. But here we're going to be checking these elements so that you can better understand what it is that we are doing and where to go in each one of these steps. And then we have the IT65, once the IPS bundle has been put together, which will give you a transaction response on the elements that will be built or created in the server. It's very similar to track 1. So you're going to be taking this structure, which is proposed by ITI 65, the bundle minimal. You're going to add within these elements the DVC IPS bundle, which is document type, obviously based on the DVC and created in your Fire server. Then the rest of the elements will be explained by Sergio once I complete the first part of the presentation. So, and the questionnaire of what we're going to be filling, or the list of elements that you should be getting from your system, you have all of the cardinals there, are all of these elements highlighting the vaccination element, the number of doses which have a value set associated. You should be using that value set, the disease, and the most important thing, well, the name of the vaccination. In this case, all of those records are there, the elements, they are in IC11. So you should be translating that regardless of the origin using the terminology server and using the terminological transactions that have been presented in other presentations. You should be transforming these into these value sets. So the elements are very common. We have the dosage, the disease, the vaccination, the commercial product, the date, the name of the supervising clinician that is providing the vaccination. Other elements, well, we have the batch number, and obviously there is a certificate validity period, and then the common elements, which are the names, the date of birth, and all of that. So this data, most likely you might not see the questionnaire with this very same structure, but all of this is the data that you're going to have in the IPS, so we're going to have to deal with each of these elements nonetheless. The DVC IPS, it's a bundle document type which is based on IPS, and therefore you will see the same common elements: composition, immunization, the patient data, and practitioner data. There you have the links. We're going to be looking at them, but the idea is that you can know which elements you can access. Each of them, each of the profiles, the patient is using the IPS and a practitioner is using another implementation guide. So this is the common structure or the simplest structure that we can represent here. The composition, the elements that must be added, and we're presenting the general format here according to the list that was in the questionnaire. There's the validity period, and the composition is put in event element is 0, and an element which is called period. The same thing with the author, right? Organization in this case, and the identifier. This is the same values that we can see here, just for you to understand. The idea is that you can understand which elements and which descriptions you're going to have to add in this structure. Obviously, it's always recommendable to add the profile with which you're modeling the information. These sections, since it's going to be an IPS, there are some sections that have to be added. I mean, They can be added, but there are some sections that are not available. And the only one that we're going to be adding for track 2 here is completing that section on immunization. There you're going to put a reference to the immunization. Element immunization, vaccination, the vaccination classification, the vaccine, the trade item, patient, practitioner. Again, it's always important to have the profile, the data elements, the batch, the disease, and the dose number, which is the last one that we have here. But this you can consult in the same guide, but the idea is that you can match the elements that you have to consult here and where to place that information. Patient data, they're actually quite limited. Here we have nationality, which is one of the elements that is requested. A profile is identifier elements and also information or contact information. And then to end, we have the practitioner. Here we only ask for the clinician name. Obviously, that's the profile that was defined, but this is going to be a very small resource. Now we will show you the examples and transactions. Here, let me switch. I'm going to go to the code. You can see it, right? Somebody, please. Yes, we can see it. So this is the bundle, the DVC IPS. Now, obviously, it has been profiled to what we're going to be looking in the implementation guide. It's a document type, as I said before. We're going to have different sections. This is the composition section. Some elements, we will be sharing this with you so that you know where to place each of these elements. And we hope to do it with the same, this can come into comments. Title, we require this organization, and this section for the IPS that will be empty. This is the empty reason, and this allows us to define the section but not to use it. These three empty sections, medications, allergies, and this other one is problems. In immunization, obviously that's not necessary because we're going to have an element here. This is just an example. There could be more. And then obviously respecting the reference, this element here is the one that we have in the composition. The immunization with each of the elements that you should complete. Vaccination, we have the date, the manufacturer, the batch, the disease, and dose number. And obviously some additional elements, which is the patient data based on this profile as per the guideline. And by making click on each of these elements, you're going to get to the same structure. Nationality, as I mentioned before, the date of birth, identification elements, and also these elements that are defined, and then the practitioner, only the clinician name. That's the structure. On paper, it looks quite simple, but based on these elements, then you can start completing. We must put this into a minimal bundle, which is what I will show you right now. A provide bundle. This is the same structure that it was used in track 1. And therefore, I'm going to submission set and all of these elements. I'm going to skip them because you know that already. Document reference, where we're going to reference our bundle or our DVC IPS. And then here we have the bundle. The same structure that we saw just now is the one that we have to add by following the same guidelines, obviously adding additional resources like the patient, for example. So we have ITI 65, this is DVC, and you may have some examples in your repository, in the repository. So yes, you will have to update the applications and the repository. So how is this executed? We have this transaction, and it'll be, I'm using here this server, but you have to do it in your own nodes, each one in your own country node with all of the reference data. And with this structure, you should be able to carry out the search operations ITI 65 and 67. Here we have three documents, is what is found. ITI 68 also, which is going to allow us to find the document. If we want to recover the bundle, that should also be possible. So here we can see that there's a bundle. It says the bundle that where it's registered. And lastly, we can see that bundle. It's the bundle that we have created with the same data. Composition, it's a DVC IPS. The second part of this presentation, well, I don't know if there are any doubts so far, because we're going to start with the next part now. I mean, this should actually be quite quick because you've already done part of this. No questions? Let's go ahead then. So the next part of the presentation will be delivered by Sergio, and it has to do with the generation of the QR and the validation. Once we have done this through ITI 65, with the bundle, we're going to carry out other operations so that we can create the QR based on that bundle or based on the information in that bundle and a later validation of that QR code. But for this, you have to have your credentials in each of your countries. Sergio, all yours.
Sí, gracias Alejandro.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Compartir pantalla.
Let me share my screen now.
Bien, se está viendo, ¿cierto? Sí. Sí, entonces para esta segunda parte de
So for this second part of the presentation, then now we're going to see how to generate and validate these DVC certificates using the tools that we have in the country node. So just as background information, what we can see here on track 2 is this diagram, which shows all the elements. The first part that Alejandro showed comes up to this section here, that is having the IPS DVC and to put it in the Fire server. So now we're going to look at the following steps, which is from this DVC IPS creating a DVC certificate and to sign it and to translate it and transform it into a QR so that it can later be used by a verification application. That's the context of track 2. And the steps to do so, as Alejandro was saying before, are basically three. One is creating the IPS at DVC. We need to have an IPS based on this new standard with the restriction that this new profile has, especially immunization fields, which are the ones that we're going to be using to create the DVC. And then the services need to be updated in the country code that allows us to generate a DVC. We're going to be looking at that in detail. And then having a client in order to create and to validate the DVC. This is similar to what we saw with a VHL before. So in order to create a DVC, well, we've just seen that going to the implementation one, the smart DVC IPS, where we can have all the resources that need to be used and how to create the IPS. Something else that I can add is that we're going to have a validator for the profile. It's not available yet, but it will be in the coming days. So you are going to be able to test that the IPSs that you're creating for this track are valid according to the standard. We will let you know once it's available. So going into or assuming that we've been able to create the DVC IPS, the idea is how to create the DVC, the QR code. And for this, we've updated the country node. So we're going to ask you to update to the latest version available. This should be the very last one for the Connectathon, where you're going to see that this is the list that is provided in each of the country codes. You're going to see the DVC mediator, but also a tool to change from IPS to MHD, which replaced the services from last year. Those that were in the previous Connectathon, you might remember it was DDCC, but it's very similar to what we used to do in DDCC. Now, in particular then, the services that were updated were these three: the bundle signer service, which is the IPS mediator that now allows for the transformation of this IPS into a DVC, the DDCC, which is a legacy name, but now that it has services. It allows us to create DVC and DDCC, and then the resource generation service where a new version was updated. So you need to then update the Docker in order to use the latest one. And these three services should be downloaded and then you should make sure that you upload the latest version.
De todo,
The requirements for these services will be checked right away. They're the same ones from last year, so if you have the repository configured out from last year, you should simply have to update and that should work. But in the case that you do not have the service from last year, what you need to configure is the country code
en la configuración del Docker Compose.
in the Docker Compose configuration. Look, we're going to go here just for you to take a look and make sure that it's absolutely clear. So here in the country code, you should have your three-letter country code and for your country. And since these certificates are signed, like the VHL, it requires a signature certification document, the famous DDCC. So you're going to be requiring the private key as well as the public key, which has to go in this serve data folder, which is in the root here. Here in serve data, you can put the DDCCs that you're going to be using to sign these certificates, and then with that, you can upload the service. That's in the case that your configuration is not ready from last year, you have to do this step. Also, if you're updating the DDCC certificates to the new ones for this year, there you're also going to have to change that in order for this to work. Very well then. So when you update this, what you will have is a service that will allow you to transform the IPS into a DVC with the QR code, similar to the transformation that we had last year of IPS to DTC, and now we're going to be doing the same thing with DVC. So for this, I would like to show you how this works, and I'll do this in two ways. The first one, we're going to do request and postman, and so here we have the postman for the project. It's the same ones that you already have shared. It was updated here. And as you can see, here there is a new request, which is a DVC transformation. So here I want to show you that we have an example which has several resources, and in particular, it has the necessary resources for immunization.
Podemos visualizarlo si quieren, pero
We can view it if you want to, but the important thing
con el mediador IPS, tal como lo
with
hacíamos
the IPS mediator, just as we did to this resource, the bundle 703, we're going to have a transformation there called DVC. And what this transformation will do is to look for this bundle, immunization, which is associated together with the other resources that it requires in order to create the DVC, and it's going to extract the information that it needs and creating the questionnaire response model, which is later used for the generation of the DVC and which gives us back a QR code. So if I run this, as you can see here, the mediator response, and what it provides me with is the batch response with a document reference, and here in the attachments is an image, which is a PNG of the QR code on a 64 base. So I can copy this
y con alguna herramienta para pasar
and with some tools to change this from a base 64.
aquí lo estoy mostrando, sí. O sea, aquí pegué el contenido que me
So I've just pasted the content from the endpoint, and you can see the image that corresponds to a QR code. This QR code is the code that has all the steps in order to transform it into a DVC certificate. It has the information of the vaccination, the payload, it is in DVC, it is signed, it is compressed, all the procedure takes place in order to end up in this certificate. So this certificate can be saved, and then we can verify the information. But in the meantime, it's important for you to know that this transformation DVC exists. And with this, you can go from an IPS DVC to a certificate. You're going to be able to see that here in the national nodes. And here in a transformation, you're going to find what I have just told you, that the IPS mediator includes the operation called DVC, which takes the immunization. This is the way it's used, and it gives you back the QR code. Also, if there's more than one immunization in the IPS, remember that these codes can be created for only one immunization, but an IPS can have more than one. So if there's more than one, the way of selecting it is by giving it an additional attribute, immunization ID, and we give it then the ID for that immunization in the IPS, which is the one that we're going to transform. So this is the document for you to check aside from the postman. And then with that, you can create the DVC once you have the IPS. Also, I wanted to show you a way of creating these certificates through a client or from a web application, just for you to see what this would be like once implemented in the whole circuit for this case use. So we have the application, and as I was saying, we have a bundle. I'm skipping the searching for the bundle. I know the ID, but normally you would probably have to have a prior transaction, ITI 67 with a patient identifier, in order to get the bundle ID. Now, here we have a bundle that I have created. And what this application does is that it gets the IPS and it lists all the immunization that the patient has. We can only create one QR code per immunization. So if I have more than one, then we need to select which one it is. We have two vaccinations here. One is influenza, the other one's for typhus. So let us choose the influenza one. This is create a DVC. It calls the service that I just showed you, and the QR code is created, and I can download it here into my device. So this is one way of connecting the service that I have just shown you to a web application. I just choose the vaccination that I want, and the signed certificate is created. So the next step. So we have the QR code, we have the certificate, and now we want to know how can we verify the code. So for this, we have a validator available in this URL, which allows us to validate the DVC certificates that have been generated. So I can go to that site, and this is the application where I can simply select the file, which is the QR code, like the one that I have just created. I can upload it, and the application gives me certain information back. The first thing it says that it has been verified, which means it's valid, that it's duly signed. That's why it says verified. Then it's the content of the QR, the string that you can see if you scan the QR code. This is the QR after having been unpacked, after verifying the signature, and after decompressing it, we have a JSON similar to this, where the payload is here in this minus 260, and we have here the information, the minimal information. Remember that this is a QR code that is self-contained. That is to say, in this string, we have the signature and the QR content. So we cannot have such an extensive IPS, otherwise the QR would be too big. And that is why it's so summarized. But also, the same application gives us a way of transforming this content, this minimal content, into an IPS. It's an a minimal IPS. It has the basic information that we can get from here, but now this is in a format that we can use using a viewer, sorry. And finally, then, some information regarding the issuer. In this case, this certificate was signed with a development signature. We can see the country, XCL, this is the ID, and the public key that was used to verify the signature from the certificate. So you have that validation certificate, which is quite comprehensive. As you can see from my QR, we can get all of this information. And this application also has an API with which you can integrate your own systems. So for example, if I come back here to the application that I was showing before, we have also integrated this. We have another view in order to validate a DVC. I can upload it. This also shows us that it's valid. It gives us information. Here we have the IPS in JSON, basic information, but the idea is just to show that it's not necessary to use this application, but you can also use it as an API, just connecting to it and showing the information that might be relevant for you. So that's another alternative. And that concludes the validation of the DVC certificate. Also in Gazelle, we're going to have a way of validating the certificate. and we're going to carry out the tests for the Connectathon using that, but we will let you know once that is available. Everything that I have shown you now, except with the exception of the Gazelle validation, is available and you can start using it right away. And then the last thing that I did want to say, or rather to remind you, is that we have this template. This is an initial template of a web application, which is what I show for the demo also, and this one. And it's only the shell. It has it has several parts that you can already use it. You can start having as a starting point. If you don't have an application thought to be using for this case use or the case of VHL, this is a good starting point. So that concludes my part of the presentation. And I'm willing to take any questions that you may have. Alejandro, is there anything else? Yes, I wanted to say, I think that in Slack we're going to be sending out the examples in Slack.
Ya, perfecto.
Yes, we will do that. Perfect.
Jorge me decía, sí, que era básicamente lo que dijo Canon, se iban a compartir los JSON.
Yes, I was going to ask if the JSONs were going to be shared
Página la podemos ocupar también.
and if we can use the same pages to start testing.
Sergio. Eso.
Yes, as I was saying, the one that I showed you here, this is the complete application after having integrated all of the systems and with our testing keys. But we do have a minimal initial version, as we call it, and it only has some basic functionalities, but it's ready for you to connect with the other functionalities. So it's in the repository that I showed you, which will be in the presentation once you get it. So you can start with that. Yes, and supplementing this, the idea is then that if you need that facade, you can use it, and you can also adapt it to and customize it. You know, the image-wise, your logos, your country. Sergio, something that you mentioned at the beginning associated to the updating of the Docker, that's very important. Maybe you can remind us the process that you must fill, that people must be completed according to the keys. The keys must be created, and I wanted to just add something, creating the keys, and if you are in the process of loading that, remember that it's the public and the not the private one that is shared in the GitHub. Sergio, maybe you can remind us some of the requirements in order to have the updated version. Okay, yes. For this for this track, you need to have the keys for the GDHN. So you must complete the process that we mentioned some weeks ago for onboarding to these trust networkers. And for this, let me remind you that there are two pathways. One is the technical and the other one is the administrative one. Administrative is where you have to complete the letters and all of that formality in that document, which is well detailed so that you can be a part of the network. Remember that the administrative process is on standby. You can complete the letters standby, but we have to wait for the formal official format, which is coming from PAHO. Remember that that's still on standby. I just want to emphasize that that letter, that administrative side is on standby. It's on hold. Okay, thank you. And then the technical pathway, which is the where we can provide you with support. There we can give you we have all the knowledge. That is cloning the repository and creating having the bot to take a look at the repository, creating the keys, and then sending the email to the right box of the GDHN. And if there you specify that this is for development purposes, that they're not going to ask you for the letters yet. So you can move forward on that track and completing that without having the letters yet. And that is the recommendation, because many countries have already asked how we can move forward. And for the onboarding and for the development, you can move forward without the letter. So you need to complete that. And what is created is the certificates, the VHL, the upload, and then with that you can start creating the DC, the IPSs that you're going to be needing for track 2. All of this is a requirement for what we're seeing now. Some countries in the meantime can use the keys that we created last year for you if you want to continue moving forward on that line in the meantime. But for the Connectathon, you're going to have the keys in the corresponding domain. And remember that you have your monitors and you can always ask for support there. That's the technical side. Remember, administrative side is still on hold, on standby, uploading the keys in the right repository in the Global Digital so that we're ready for the Connectathon. There's a question in the chat pod. When will the video and the presentation be shared? The videos will be uploaded today in the afternoon in the YouTube channel in Rexel, LACPASS, and the presentations, as soon as our speakers make it available, we can share with you. In fact, Alejandro is saying that the examples that were being asked, they're already available in the general Slack channel available. We have only a few minutes. Are there any questions? Any additional questions? Okay, everything seems to be clear. Well, if that's the case, then let me share my screen just for a second, just to put some pressure on you. We have 21 more days for the Connectathon, and the idea is that in this timeline, we can close everything that's pending from track 1. There are different levels of progress in the different countries. You all know your status. We've sent it out to you. So we need to close that so that we can focus on the track 2, on what we have presented today. There are many tools then that are reused from the work, so that's important. And close track 1 and then start doing the steps that are for track 2. Remember that we will enable the Docker, and the idea is then to start working. If you have any technical support, you have the monitors in each of your countries, and if there's any additional question, you can make sure that you can get it to us. Thank you so much for attending today, and this will be available. Oh, sorry, there's an additional question from Gerard. Sergio, can you take that? Sorry, Gerard, I almost missed it.
Yeah, for the verification, we have the application that I showed. Let me share my screen again. So yeah, we have this application where it's a web application, but under the hood it also has an API, so you can request that API from a mobile application, for example, or any client that you would like to use. So yeah, that's the way. There is also another mobile application, but it's under development, so it's not ready yet. But the recommendation is to use this web application or the API that this application use for your clients.
Gracias, Sergio.
Thank you, Sergio. Thank you very much. Very well. And are you absolutely sure? No more questions? We're closing now. Going once. Okay, no hands are up. So we're closing today's session. You already know the communication channels that we have available for any additional doubt that may come up, and the presentations will be uploaded soon. Thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you in the next webinar. I shall be confirming the one that we still have pending from last Thursday, obviously related to this topic on the certification network. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Muchas gracias.
Hasta luego.
Chao.